Good morning, class. Today we are going to be discussing vertebrates versus invertebrates. And by the end of the class today, you should be able to categorize different animals into these two different categories. We will discuss some examples of both of these, as well as I will give you a definition to keep in mind as we go through the rest of this module and the lesson of learning about animals and vertebrates versus invertebrates. So a vertebrate is an animal of a large group distinguished by the possession of a backbone or spinal column, including mammals, birds, reptiles, amphibians, and even fish. So I added this picture of the cheetah right here next to it because that is just one example of a vertebrate. There are lots of other examples, as you can see, by the mammals, the birds, reptiles, amphibians, and fish. There are so many different things that would be classified under vertebrae, and even some things that may surprise you as being classified under vertebrae. But we'll take a deeper look into this to be able to classify a few vertebrates here in just a few minutes. An invertebrate is an animal lacking a backbone, such as an arthropod, mollusk, annelid, coelenterate, etc. The invertebrates constitute an artificial division of the animal kingdom comprising 95% of animal species and about 30 different phyla. So with this, I added the picture of the bumblebee right next to it. So a lot of your invertebrates are going to be a lot of different insects and mollusk, or maybe like a jellyfish or something like that in the ocean. A lot of these will have something called an exoskeleton. Instead of having that spinal column, the exoskeleton will kind of act as that for them. So the bee I just thought was a perfect example of that. We'll also be able to understand a little bit later too, after we classify some of these different examples, maybe why some are invertebrates, why some are vertebrates, and how that helps them in the environment that they live in. For this class assignment, what I want you to do is we are going to group these different animals into two categories of either vertebrates or invertebrates. I will let you do this first part with a partner. The next part will be on your own, but for now, just work with the person sitting next to you, and you'll be classifying whether a human is a vertebrate or invertebrate, as well as a fish, a snail, a bumblebee, a horse, a starfish, a frog, a spider, and even a grizzly bear. And then as you go through and classify these, I want you to be thinking about maybe why these different animals need to be a vertebrate to live and to adapt in the environment that they live in currently. So just think about that as you go through and answer this, and then I will pull the class back together and then we'll go over the answers for these just to make sure you have a pretty solid understanding of what each of those looks like. Here are the answers for the vertebrate group. So we have a human, a fish, a frog, a horse, and a bear. All of these would be classified as vertebrates because they do have a spinal column of some sort. So for those of you that had these five being the vertebrates, congratulations, you did a great job. So with that, like I said, be thinking about maybe why these different animals need a spinal column to survive in everyday life, to get by, and we'll maybe get to answer this question a little bit later on. Now that we've done the vertebrates, I want to go ahead and have you also group the invertebrates, and with this one I want you to do it by yourself. That way you can kind of get a better feeling for that and maybe aid in some of your understanding of the subject. So why don't you go ahead, take a few minutes and group these different animals into the invertebrate category, and with that we'll come back and discuss in just a few minutes. If you did choose these 4 animals to be the invertebrate section, congratulations, you're right. So with that, we have the bumblebee, the spider, a starfish, and a snail. None of these have a spinal column of some kind. A lot of them do have the exoskeleton instead of that spinal column, so just a little bit different. But as we have these answers, really start thinking about why them being invertebrates is essential to how they survive. Now that everyone has a better understanding of what a vertebrate is and what an invertebrate is, I have a question for y'all to think about. I want you to write this on your exit ticket and hand that to me on the way out, just so I can understand kind of what everybody is understanding, what people aren't understanding, different ways that I can go into more detail about things for next class and as we advance more into this module. So the essential question is, how does being a vertebrate or an invertebrate affect how an animal lives in and adapts to their environment? So I want you to think about this, write that on your exit ticket. Maybe an example would be, this is my example, I think an owl being a vertebrate helps them hunt because they can swivel their head all the way around looking for prey. So they for sure have that spinal column, which allows them to turn their neck all the way around and look for prey, make sure that nothing is coming up around them, that they're in any danger. So it's a really great hunting tactic for them, as well as just something to keep them safe. So that is just one example. You aren't allowed to use that example. Think of one on your own. And then if you could also write your example on that exit ticket, then you may leave when you're done.